Welcome to the Lorecast. I'm Dr. Craig Chalkwist, and we're here to discuss the stories by which we deeply live. After 9/11, I was talking with James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, who had recently visited New York City. And he was telling us, there was other people present, that he was horrified by what he saw, and of course some of that included the casualties and the destruction of the city itself. But he said there was one thing in particular that really shook his attention. And he seemed reluctant to talk about it, so I asked him, what was that? And he said the giant mound of teddy bears that had been gathered as some kind of memorial. And he said, imagine thinking that teddy bears would be an adequate response, not only to the disaster of 9/11, but everything that led up to it, all the denial, all the rage built up around the world against the U.S., all the complicity with what we do to other countries, everything that led up to it. And the response was teddy bears. And so he started talking then about what he called American innocence. I'm going to call it pseudo-innocence, because it seems to me that innocence is an appropriate quality for children to have, and also an appropriate quality to have in certain moments where we're open, unusually open to new things that are happening, new ideas, new experiences. Pseudo-innocence, developmentally, is when you're acting like an innocent when you shouldn't be, because you're supposed to be an adult. And I think, whatever you make of his opinion, I think Hillman correctly identified that part of American psychology. And even the fact that we call ourselves Americans as though there weren't Americans elsewhere. There's North America, Central America, South America. And on the oldest maps to use the word America, they actually point to South America. So we have this tremendous shadow, as Jung would call it, that is shielded by our pseudo-innocence. We don't seem to have any, most of us, there's of course many exceptions, but as a country, we seem to have no sense of our impact on other countries, other societies. And that goes right back to the very beginning. I mean, we were, as colonials, attacking Canada before the country was even put together, our country. So this weird combination of hostility and innocence has characterized us throughout our history. So I'm open to the possibility, however painful it is, that the wholesale ransacking of the U.S. government and the mass firing of people who work for it, which of course is destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and ruining national parks and drying up resources for the needy and vulnerable and all kinds of terrible effects. It'll take us generations to recover from it, and some people never will. There are people dying right now because of this. But at the same time, I'm wondering if in all this tragedy, there's an opportunity for those of us who make it through to rethink what it means to be an American, to be a citizen of the United States who isn't shadow blind, who actually stares darkness in the face, to borrow a phrase from Rollo May, who said, to quote him exactly, he said, "The ultimate error is the refusal to look evil in the face." And so now you have thousands of people saying things like, I never thought it would be this bad. I never thought this would happen to me, despite decades of warning. And the warnings go pretty far back. When Thomas Mann emigrated from Nazi Germany to the United States, he saw the blacklists that were demonizing Hollywood and other employees, McCarthyism, accusing people of being communists. They were losing their livelihoods and their reputations. And Thomas Mann commented at one point, yeah, that's how it started with us, too. So this has been a long time in the making. And it's important to note that the innocence is mostly on the part of those of us who are white and privileged. In general, people of color have known what was going on since it's been going on. No surprise from them. It's the rest of us who aren't subjected to constant racism and discrimination and everything else, violence, who seem to be the most surprised. I was reading in the news today about a farmer who just killed himself because the man he voted for, Trump, issued an executive order that wiped out his farm as collateral damage. So as I was sitting with all this, I went into TikTok where I have an account, and I did this in Instagram too. I put up a video and I talked about the myth of Persephone and how innocent she was at the beginning, out picking narcissus flowers. Interesting choice. Oblivious to any danger when Hades erupted from the ground, pulled her down into the underworld, raped her, and forced her to be his wife. And I emphasized in the telling that the part, I did 2 videos on this actually, that the part that I tended to focus on the most was what she did with this tragedy, how she came out of it smarter and with what we might call night vision, soul sight, the ability to see in the dark. This is something also that Innana obtains when her sister Ereshkigal hangs her up on a hook and kills her. Innana goes back to the underworld when she has been rescued, a wiser and more complete and more shadow-conscious being. And so I'm wondering if that's what we're going through now as a nation, especially those of us stuck in pseudo-innocence, because it's being ripped away right and left on all sides. And interestingly, there's this tendency that we all have to some extent of fighting against awareness of the dark. And it showed up in a peculiar way on TikTok with my first post especially, which is what prompted the second one. So as the video headed up to 20,000 views, and by the time you hear this, it'll be more. There were a number of people, and not all men, by the way, who made comments like, well, I heard that there were versions where she went willingly, Persephone went willingly, or I don't think Hades really raped her. And I mentioned some of the early sources for this myth, including the Homeric hymn to Demeter, and Ovid mentions it at one point. Hesiod mentions it very briefly. They all say she was abducted. All the early sources say she was abducted. And the Homeric hymn, especially, which gives the most complete story, says that Persephone was dragged to the underworld. She was forced into the bed of Hades and made to be his wife. That's rape. So there's a couple of ways, I think, to understand this reaction in the comments. One is resistance to understanding that that's something significant about our culture. That many of us are in the same position as Persephone right now, particularly with a loss of innocence, pseudo-innocence, and resisting that and wanting to stay innocent. And so this gets projected onto Hades. Well, he can't be that bad a guy. He was faithful to her. He honored her, right? Another part of it that I think is important to name is that we live in a country that deeply hates women and sanctions rape culture. And it shows. So I think that's part of it too, a very ugly underside of American psychology. We don't all suffer from it, but enough of us do that we now have a president who is convicted of sexual assault and people are supporting him and making excuses for him. And look at the underworld ghoul squad he has picked to work with him. Wow. So, if there's anything that stands a chance of awakening us to our pseudo-innocence, to our long neglect of shadow vision, and to our obliviousness to what goes on outside our own borders, perhaps it's this level of catastrophe now unfolding. Perhaps we're being called to shed our remaining illusions, stand up, act like adults, push back, and really have a diverse and abundant country with a new set of guiding visions and a new cycle of stories so that we can all move forward together. I did some videos on that as well, by the way. They're in YouTube also. There's a whole playlist of these, I think at this point, 7 videos on reimagining the USA. This might also be preparation for losing enough of our national narcissism as well as our pseudo-innocence to participate as adults in the world community, including the ecological community all around us. So the government has been withdrawing us from relationships and treaties right and left. And even with other governments in power, we tend not to sign important agreements, which of course the rest of the world notices. We tend not to collaborate well. We tend to think of ourselves as the lone cowboy who rides in, rights wrongs, beds whoever's available, and rides out of town again, with no responsibility for any consequences or fallout. So I think this is an opportunity also to mature to the point where we actually recognize that other people love their countries, that other lands matter, that our own lands matter, not to mention all the beings and the creatures who live in them, and that it's time for us to actually be good stewards and good democratic participants. I don't know if American privilege is a term, but our behavior as a nation collectively often reminds me of male privilege, where men, and we got that this way honestly because we were raised like this and conditioned like this, we tend to think that in any given conversation, we're the center of it. We're the most important voices. We'll explain it all to you because we're the experts. This is where mansplaining comes from, where you're telling, let's say, women who are nuclear physicists and astronauts their business, which they train to do and hold PhDs in, as though you knew anything. So I actually try to counter that by not only teaching my students about male privilege, but when I'm in meetings, I don't usually speak first. I spend more time listening. Patriarchy is what, 8,000 years old, older? And we've been talking the whole time about we think this and we think that, and you should do this and you should do that. Maybe it's time for us to just listen. And when I bring this up to men, when I say this to men, they often get offended, and that's part of our entitlement right there. How dare you question my ability to comment on everything, even when I know nothing about it? So American privilege looks a lot like that. It's the assumption that we're the center of everything, that we're the most important of everything. The problem is the rest of the world realizes with perfect clarity that that's not true. They are now forming alliances that didn't exist before to counter how we're showing up in the world with our newly emboldened imperialism of old resurrected in the present. So there's going to be all kinds of fallout from this internationally. There already is, but it'll get worse. But all of that would change practically overnight if, as a nation, we showed up having learned our lessons of humility and willing to learn about ourselves and other people and listen in on different kinds of conversations and recognize that we're not the center. There is no center. There's Earth floating in the cosmos. In social media, there was a Swedish woman in World Talk who said, it'd just be nice if the Americans realized that there are important people beyond their own borders. And often people who firmly disagree with us, who say we should protect the planet and what's left of it, we should honor all these agreements, we should have trade that's fair, and we shouldn't turn Gaza into a golf course. That's part of maturity too. That's part of giving up some narcissism, is realizing that you've got to negotiate with people because you live here with them. So now we're all in the school of hard knocks. Those of us who need to be, and also those of us who don't deserve to be. And I've been thinking about this lately too. I rewatched a couple of episodes of the series Star Trek Enterprise, which takes place before Kirk and Spock, before there's even a Federation. There is an early version of Starfleet, and so the Enterprise of those days is commanded by an American captain, a white American captain named Jonathan Archer, and he is such a Boy Scout and a cowboy in the negative sense. And when that ship launches, he goes running up to everybody he can find. Hey, we're from Earth. You want the coordinates? And he quickly finds out that his far more experienced Vulcan science officer, who's been on many planet missions, actually knows what she's talking about. He spends a lot of time ignoring her for various reasons. And it's painful to watch when she says things like, this planet you're going to take a shuttle down to and run around on because it has nice grass and hills and stuff. Better check out the chemistries first. Oh, we'll check them out when we go down there. And they go down there and they all go nuts, right? She was right. And there's several situations where he goes bursting in to be a helpful rescuer and finds out either that he's on the wrong side or that he just made the situation worse. He's especially innocent about that warrior race, the Klingons, who he keeps trying to make friends with. And it shows signs of him waking up when he finally gets tough with them and realizes this is no cakewalk out here. This is real danger with real beings who have different agendas. And maybe there's something there we can learn from Persephone and Innana as well, how to be tough in the right situations instead of always assuming that just enough love, just enough empathy, and people will do what we want and get along with us. When in fact, they'll usually, in situations where we're dealing with unscrupulous people, they'll usually hold us in contempt for exactly those behaviors. So Archer rescues a Klingon ship, and when he talks to the commander threatens to board the Enterprise. No gratitude there. And Archer has finally wised up. And he says, you wouldn't last 10 seconds in a battle with us. Your ship is damaged and blah, blah, blah. He goes through all the problems. And then he says, fire one shot and I'll blast you back where we found you. And so he avoids conflict that way. Maybe we need to toughen up. Maybe we need night vision. Not to be jerks, not to push people around and be bullies, but to push back when it's appropriate. And to get rid of the pseudo-innocent illusion that being nice to people long enough is somehow going to miraculously convert them to either our point of view or to a position where they won't harm us anymore and take away our essential services and even threaten our lives. There's a time for appropriate aggression. Eric Fromm calls it defensive aggression in contrast to malignant aggression that really is destructive. And one of the hallmarks of defensive aggression is that it's together. It's all of us together. It's not the lone bully. It's the town, the neighborhood, the group that stands up, the nation, and says, we won't put up with this anymore. And you have to stop. Thank you.